It was almost like, yeah, all of these things are happening and they're bad, but they're all my fault.
I'm afraid that the next time I'm not going to make it because I don't know who this man is.
After healing physically, I began, the lifelong process of healing emotionally.
And your children are in danger and you have got to get out. Some friends came in and we got out, the stuff that we needed, and I went and stayed with friends for a couple of weeks until we found a place to live, and that was it. There are people who experience things that they will never tell you about because they're too embarrassed. And you don't know that the person who's sitting beside you at church or beside you at work or that you're passing in the grocery store, just because they have on a nice sweater doesn't mean that they aren't going through a horrible time. Looks are very deceiving. And I think that helping empower people, not putting a Band-Aid on something, empowering people to change their lives and showing them how to change their lives is an answer for that.
What we also recognize and have for many, many years in the field is that for many women, what is said to them has a much greater, serious, long-term, profound effect on them. Coming from the mouths of survivors, you may well hear, "It's not what he did to me, the bruise went away, it's what he said to me that I remember."
Even though we usually think of psychological abuse as something that's happening just with a few very bad relationships here and there, it seems that there are a lot of things that people end up doing to each other that would actually qualify as being kind of serious psychological actions that they do to each other. How people portray what's happening to them, does that seem to be the way an objective observer or a professional might see it as happening? And in the cases where they do converge, what can we learn from that? First of all, if everybody's defining it differently, it's very difficult to solve, because how do we know when to intervene, or how would a judge in a divorce case know that this is a genuine case that I need to look at differently than this case over here? We can work on individual bases, but I think we need to be very careful about what we can claim in terms of research or our understanding of psychological abuse until we do a lot more in the area. And I hope a lot of people get interested in the area in terms of trying to make it a more sophisticated and informative field.
So we now have a partnership with the State Domestic Violence Association. They received a grant to look at the experience of incarcerated women and to look at what is it that places women at risk of incarceration. Because if we can understand that better, then maybe we can prevent that homicide, prevent that most egregious case from happening, where women not only sustain long-term abuse, but they ultimately end up incarcerated for taking an act against the offender to save themselves.
We've created the Incarcerated Battered Women's Advocacy Project, which is comprised of the research that we're doing, and then we have also developed committees that are looking at at-risk incarcerated women and formerly incarcerated women. And so this first year has been spent on how do you even identify who would need the services in any of those groups? How are we going to go into the community and find out who is at risk? How are we going to go into a jail or prison and find out who is there and their charges are related to their previous victimization? And then how do you find the women when they're out so that we can get services to them? So that's what we've been focusing on for this first year. The second year of the grant is focused on taking some of the information that we've gathered, and now it will advise the ways that we create curricula, support groups. It involves some networking and some community organizing around the issue, involving groups that are already working with incarcerated populations. It's pulling in community leaders so that it now becomes part of the platforms and things that they talk about. And then this third year, the third year of the grant, our hopes is to actually start disseminating all of the information that we have. So there's a resource guide that will be available at the end of this. We hope that there will be support groups that will be up and running, that the other agencies or organizations that are doing this kind of work are aware of what we've put together, and that they're now implementing some of the things into their everyday work.
In 1997, my boyfriend and I were at the railroad tracks in Lexington. We were putting quarters on the track to flatten them, but no trains came, so we just sat there and talked. We were approached by a man who eventually tied us up, gagged us. He eventually hit my boyfriend with a 52-pound rock and killed him instantly. And he raped, beat, and stabbed me. Definitely tried to kill me, but I did not die. I survived and, went to a nearby house for help. And after healing physically, I began, the lifelong process of healing emotionally. But through that healing process, I knew that I wanted to help other people, and that maybe I could use my experience to hopefully, just maybe inspire someone else. And so that's when I started public speaking. My first speaking engagement was actually at the University of Kentucky. I spoke to 700 young women that were entering the university, and to have them basically say that my story inspired them, or that they felt a little bit more aware and safe because they had heard that this had happened to me. I think I show that that crimes like this can happen to anyone. No one is immune to having something bad happen to them, but it's how you react to it and how you live through it and survive through it that makes the difference. I credit a lot to my support system. I had an amazing support system. I don't think I could be in front of you today if I didn't. So I, credit a lot to that support system and how I got through that tragic experience. But
the research, I feel like, has the power to validate the stories that we have been hearing, to do that in a quantitative way and in a way that helps to shape policy. I know I have learned over the last 5 years that when we're talking to legislators about certain issues, that it's very important that we have something tangible to back up what we're saying.
A problem in doing the research is you're trying to find out not just whether or not something happened, but how the person views it. Did they think it was harmful? Did they find that it hurt them? So not just did it happen, but how do they subjectively look at it?
We don't have a very good way of conversing across disciplines yet in our particular field. We also don't have enough federal research funding. Now, probably any field, any group of scientists out there will tell you they don't have enough federal research funding. In our case, I think we can demonstrate that that's very true. We also don't have a way to define violence against women very easily. Now that's a problem because some research studies define violence against women very, very broadly. Others define violence against women very narrowly. So if you're trying to compare across research studies, even prevalence data, that becomes a challenge as well for us. We also, because we're not an organized discipline, we don't have a very good way of transposing the knowledge base from one generation of scientists to the next generation of scientists. We felt it was time to offer something provocative, to advance the way in which we approach research in the violence against women area. And so this center has proposed creation of a new area of science to address violence against women, not unlike what was done with sustainability science within the past decade, with cognitive science. The change in approach is this: it is not around a discipline that you define yourself, but rather it is around the problem you study. So it is multiple disciplines coming around a singular problem.
So it's changed a lot, but some things just haven't changed enough. And I think that the more we document and empirically support the claims that are being made, the better we'll be at refuting many of the myths and also raising public awareness. But it's come a long way in a very short period of time when you consider it's only been 30 to 40 years.
It would be terrific if we could get a large randomized clinical trial to address the question not only of does screening improve health outcomes for women and their children, but also what additional interventions.
What are the kinds of things about a person that help them get through that experience without developing a serious disorder like depression or anxiety? All of those pieces of information will be needed to be able to then start to figure out where do we intervene and how do we make decisions.
The interests that are shared amongst this group of researchers in this area are not broadly shared across a discipline. And I see the center as providing an opportunity to get the message out to a broad spectrum of scientists in multiple disciplines so that they can begin to talk with one another about how their research might apply to the overall agenda of reducing violence against women.
I think the next step is continuing to try to convey the urgency with which we must undertake the study of violence against women, that we need all partners together. We need all disciplines within universities around this country who should come together and look at whether or not they want to create an interdisciplinary research center on violence against women adapted to whatever strengths that particular university has. But if every community where there's a large institution, large research institution like the University of Kentucky could create an interdisciplinary research center, partner with local practitioners and local advocates, think nationwide what we could do in the way of contributing to ending violence against women.
We had to do research that hit the ground in the state of Kentucky that changed lives in Kentucky. And so we're now looking at those things that have been holding this state back for a long time.
And research ideas, the best ones, are incubated in the practice field. Advocates and practitioners have the research questions. Researchers then play the role of helping come up with the answers. And then the real part of research happens as those answers go back to the practice field to make services to women and children better.